So, I mean, it also kind of reminds me of this stunt that the White House just pulled with the DoorDash driver, coming there. She's sitting there, the DoorDash grandma, I believe she's called, and, you know, he's bringing her there to advertise no tax on tips, which is a policy that's going to end, by the way. That's a temporary policy.
Right.
But, but, she's sitting there doing DoorDash for her husband that's also like dying of cancer or something like that, and like the entire reason she has to be working this job right now is because she doesn't have universal health care.
Exactly. And a company like DoorDash, I'm from New York, you're from New York. This is big. Like the cabbies in New York, right? The fact that they have essentially lobbied to not have to pay them a living wage or provide them health care. So that is immediately what kind of just like dinged off for me. Also, as an aside, she's the same lady that they used for a stunt last year. So I doubt that her story is even real. If it is, I'm sorry. Um, but to your point, it is indicative of a broken system. And
I
I
think it's
just
also funny because, he tried to make this stunt to highlight one of his his only policy that I could think of that's benefiting people. And and yet, like I think all it did was actually serve to highlight all of the issues in the system.
yes, it was stark. I mean, it was again, if you take it at face value and you say this is a real grandmother and this is a real situation, because as a candidate, these are real situations that we encounter.
Hmm.
I spoke to someone last month who essentially was bled dry paying for her husband's treatment and he passed away and she is basically living around the poverty line now, having sank her savings into trying to prolong her husband's life, which is what any of us would do for our loved one. And it's just stark because any rational person wouldn't look at that and say, well, good on her for picking up three jobs. Like, yeah, you can marvel at the work ethic, but there's a reason behind the work ethic, and that's survival. And no one should ever,
Yeah.
you know, it just doesn't make sense to me. And to your point about Republicans, like I had a friend, he sent me like he's conservative, as like a lot of my friends from my hometown are, and he sent me like the Democrats tweet. It said like tax the rich, and he was like, this is just a slogan. And I'm like, okay, but like, what does it mean to you? And he was like, yeah. He's like, well, we should have better tax policy pertaining to like tax loopholes. I'm like, that's all they're saying. But you're not radicalized, but you're taught to just not like the slogan. And sometimes baseline slogans are bad, But in that case, saying tax the rich, there's nothing wrong with that. What you're saying is, especially in an era where we are not nuanced with our policy prescriptions, um, one-liners sometimes carry a lot of weight because you understand what that means. What that means is not literally tax every single person that makes over $100,000 a year. It means close loopholes and make sure that Jeff Bezos isn't paying the effective tax rate of me and you. That's all that means. Um,
Yeah.
but but sometimes we've been sort of corralled into, if you're blue and you say something, it's not as good as if you're red and you say something, even if you're saying the same thing. And, trying to see what we can do about that out here.
I think it's even uh, to me the problem almost seems a little bit more daunting than that in the sense that,
Oh
to
yeah.
me it seems that like there are huge swaths of the country that have been watching Fox News for 20 or 30 years, and they have just been completely, I hate using the word brainwashed, but I mean, convinced that Democrats are evil.
Yes.
They
Yes.
call us democrats, they sit there and call us libtards. They seemingly vote just to piss the other side off.
It can feel that way. And, some of those are the TFGs, right? The too far gones. And I think you have to no, that's big. I think that's, because I'm glad you said that because I think there's a naivete in some establishment groups where they're like, will win the Trumpers over one day. I'm like, you won't.
No,
You won't.
you're
You
not.
know, you
Yeah,
simply
no.
won't. But the only counter to that is I'll say, obviously I'm pretty obviously putting it out there that I would never vote for a Republican. I don't believe in their policies, but I think many of us would probably fall victim to, when a Republican says things that we agree with, automatically discounting it. Now you should, because most of the time they're not, I'm thinking of like a James Fishback in Florida, right? He says things, he sounds like a progressive, and then he tells a black guy that he needs to be lynched. And he's having relations with like 15 or 16-year-old young girls.
Yeah,
So obviously he's not like us. But you know, I just think that when we hear like an old Republican grandpa saying, the rich need to be taxed, et cetera, there is an avenue. Not all of them are Trumpers. I know a lot of people, obviously, as do you, growing up in Comac, who, there's like the actual MAGA, there's like MAGA adjacent, and then there are people who are just conservative. And it's sometimes it feels like the just conservative is the smallest group, and it probably is.
yeah,
But again, I just, as much as my politics inform who I am, and I want to just like say, like, push these people over here because they'll never agree with anything. I think my run inherently speaks to my desire to still try and find that common ground, though.
sure, yeah,
Because I've had Republicans come to my town halls. I've had Republicans show up. Not every Republican is commenting that I'm like a P word, F word, under my Instagram, which is fine. Like I take the heat because that's what you do when you're a public servant, is you take the heat. And I like to give it as much as I can take it. So that's one thing about me is that I won't be like, if you're bad faith, I'll be petty to you because there's no point in trying to, if someone says, oh well, you know you're just you're a rapist, communist, this, that's not a good faith person with any grasp on reality. So for me, like, you can F with people like that a little bit if we're being honest. But in terms of people who, because I've, genuinely, I've had Republicans show up to my town hall and they say, I've never been to a Democrat event. I really don't agree with what you're saying, but I want to hear you out. And to me, that can't be lost on us, especially as young Democrats who feel so scorned by the older conservative guard in this country
yeah.
that, you know what, at the end of the day, if someone is willing to admit they made a mistake or they had a mistake in perception, we should we should be open to them, because an unfortunate part of the human character is sometimes, when you feel like you've accepted something and you're not accepted by the group that you now want to be accepted with, that is actually a negative reinforcement. And you go back into sort of into your hole and you say, well, they're not accepting me, F them, et cetera, et cetera. We need to be accepting of people who have even been triple Trumpers at times because, will they change? Wholeheartedly, no, but we need to come to a point in this country where we are not in our silos. And, we are just as guilty of that as progressives, as Democrats, as anyone else. I'm a victim of the purity testing on the left daily, which is, again, fine because that's what I signed up for. But I think that we also need to be reasonable with our expectations of people whose opinions we're trying to change, I guess.
What is your take on MAGA Republicans like former Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene?
I think that she is a true believer. And there's a little bit there to be said about MAGA. Now, it's hard because I think that the driving force for a lot of these people was the hatred and the fact that there was an underlying hatred within a lot of these people that allowed that anger to be stoked. But a lot of their anger is misplaced, obviously. Like we all know this. And I don't really know what to make of people like that because this is kind of like a newer phenomenon in terms of MAGA. You used to have like the Joe Walshes, right, who were like Kevin McCarthy sycophants, and they left the party because they were like, well, I don't have a home here. And I don't really see a lot of courage in this. People might disagree with me. I don't think that like Liz Cheney is very courageous. I don't think
Neither
that
do
Adam
I.
Kinzinger is very courageous. They didn't jump, they were kicked. And I think that,
That's exactly right.
but I think MTG jumped.
Yes.
And I think that's interesting. And again, I don't like the things she said about Jewish people. I don't like the things she said about, you know, immigrants and just people of color in general.
Chasing
About
Parkland school shooting survivors.
exactly. So, there's a level of there's a level of a lack of education and perhaps a lack of empathy there.
Yeah.
But she's actually indicative of America sometimes being a very self-centered country in terms of its everyday populace. And I don't mean that in a negative way. Sometimes that has been the thing that has driven us towards excellence, and sometimes that has been the thing that has isolated us as a society. And right now it's isolating us, wherein, she only now realizes because she's not part of the club, right?
Yeah.
And once she had a real disagreement, she was no longer part of that club. And I do commend to some degree that there was that it did take some courage to do that. Um, but someone like Tucker, you've spent the last 30 years creating this problem. Just because you have some nuanced anti-war take on it doesn't mean that, you are now in the fold. Again, I commend that people are able to say the right thing when they say it. And obviously for Marjorie Taylor Greene, it's had far bigger repercussions than it has for someone like Tucker. Um, but I don't know. I really don't. I don't mean to be like long-winded and not give a great answer, but I just don't know because I want to think it's good faith, and she has seemingly been more good faith. So maybe she's just an actress at the end of the day. I don't really know. Um, but
I kind of feel that she actually is in good faith. Like
no, I think she is a believer. I think she is a
yeah,
believer, but I think she may have been putting on an act for a bit of time in terms of putting
sure.
up with some of the stuff she disagreed with. Um, but
I
yes,
don't
I
think
didn't mean
Tucker
to.
is
Yeah,
I don't think Tucker is in good faith though. Tucker is, not even a few weeks ago,
no, yeah,
he's still on his show with Piers Morgan sitting there asking him, "Why can't I just call gay people faggots?" It's like,
right,
"Whoa.
right, yeah,
Whoa,
yeah,
Tucker,
yeah.
like what are
That's
you
not even a free
saying?"
speech. That's not even a free speech argument. Like no one is stopping him from doing that. By the way,
Right.
it's just the fact that you have to make this like wokeness thing part of our political curriculum.
Or sitting there questioning whether Pete Buttigieg is actually gay. I mean,
I
Tucker
saw
sits there
that.
and he
Yeah,
like you said, like I'll give him credit for his anti-war take, and that's pretty much
sure.
where that credit ends.
But but not to interject, that anti-war take is completely without nuance because he really only cares about Palestinian Christians.
Yeah.
Um, and
Yes.
and
That's a great point.
and yes, he'll say it's a genocide, and he said something about Islam the other day. The point he made about Islam, about not disrespecting religion, had nothing to do with Islam. He doesn't care. It had everything to do with Christianity, and that he felt that Christianity had been mocked. But Tucker is a smart guy, and he knows that if I say as well, oh, he really shouldn't be, doing this to the Muslim populations, that he'll get of some short-sighted, you know, people that are on the anti-war left to say, well, he's a reasonable guy. He's not.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
am an Orthodox Christian, right? My, in name, I'm not the most practicing that you'll ever meet, but I would never couch my criticism of what's going on in the Middle East with, look at what they're doing to the Orthodox Church. They are doing awful things to the Orthodox Church, and it hurts me as a Greek person of the faith. But it's not just happening to us and us. It's happening to people more broadly. And I think that's where I've been a little bit surprised with Marjorie because she's actually gone that extra step to say some of those things. I don't know how much to believe her. Trust is hard to gain and easy to lose. So right now we don't have much trust in that woman. She has a long way to go for us to believe what she's saying more. And there's a lot of things that I won't forgive from her because I do think that unless she comes out 100% and says, I was wrong, I was uneducated, I apologize to the families of the Parkland victims and et cetera, then,
Yeah.
but in terms of being a useful idiot, she's pretty good.
If you like this video and you want to see more, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and if you want to keep this machine running, please subscribe to the Patreon page, where you get early access to all these reviews before they hit the channel. All right, I'll see you next week.